Good morning, and welcome back to the Word and Journey podcast, stories that shape us and make us think, where we save you time by saving you from bad stories and hopefully introduce you to good literature and everything like that. So, here is Moses, Jake, and Stephanie again, back with the Screwtape Letters. We are ready to come close to finishing the book. I realize I budgeted us for 10 letters a session, but there's like 33 and an epilogue, so there might be a bonus one sometime. But anyway, so how are you doing, Jake?
I'm doing all right. It's been kind of a crazy few weeks, a crazy January. Hopefully February is more chill. Knocking on wood for that. But plugging along. It was good to read the chapters. I'm excited to be back with y'all. I was sad that I ended up having to miss the last session. So
yeah. Well, always better together.
Yeah.
So, Jake, you want to kick us off with letter 21? Some basic commentary. What is this saying? What's this about?
Yeah, so letter 21, I believe, follows kind of an escapade around like trying to promote lust and sexual sin in the patient in letter 20. I could be wrong because it's been a while since I've read that section. But here, Wormwood is actually very mad that instead of him falling like more and more and just to promiscuity, he's found this good Christian woman. And instead, he focuses on guarding time, or not guarding time, but making him very selfish of time. We want to make him focus that time is his own instead of belonging. In the end, I think I think Wormwood said that all things end up falling into either the enemy's mine or everything of their father's mine. And so to kind of like zealously and overzealously guard this patient's time, he becomes more irritable, he becomes more irrational, and becomes very selfish. Be thrown into a rage at the slightest inconvenience of your time. This feels like I'm being called out a little bit. I hope that I'm much better about this, but sometimes, I mean, as we're all human, right? Like sometimes I'm very, very angry, like when somebody puts upon me this like maybe even slight inconvenience. Like I needed to have this time or whatever. And even though like there's a balance too, right? Of like sometimes I need to go and be recluse for a while to kind of recharge or whatever. But there is that kind of difference of just being too overzealous, and again kind of thinking like, oh no, it's my time, it's all mine, which again falls back on kind of that selfishness.
Yeah, I hear you on that feeling called out. There's a letter coming up where I'm like, oh, Mr. Lewis, stop eavesdropping on my marriage counseling, because it was like this one I feel it too, and it reminds me a little bit of like entitlement narratives, which we talk about.
Yeah,
where it's the idea of mine, like this thing is mine and I own it, and I just happen to own it. And that's, I guess, when you think about it, like possession's kind of a weird concept, maybe like a really artificial concept anyway. Like what really is mine? Like what really do I totally both earn and deserve and can completely manage and hold on to? I mean, nothing really. I mean, we created beings are entirely contingent on the uncreated. So yes, I likewise get irritated there.
you're such a commie.
Yeah. Yeah. Pass the scotch. So yes, indeed. Yeah. Any other thoughts on letter 21 and I guess is this one more about possessiveness in general or about like time in particular, do you think?
Time in particular. And I am sorry, I mixed up a little bit of letter 21 and letter 22.
That's okay.
I got a little bit distracted. But yes, this is much more focused on time as instead of sexual temptation, which was the prior letter.
Gotcha. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Stephanie?
I was going to say, I think time is one of those things that we we feel we have so much right to, like I get annoyed when somebody's late and I feel like they're disrespecting my time, but like really, do I have any control over my own time? Like you're going to die when you're going to die, right?
Yeah.
So it's not really mine.
Yeah. And I've been appreciating that as a theme. It's like one of the subtle themes through this story is uh, how we relate to death. And Screwtape and Wormwood, they seem very bent on having the patient forget about death or not think
Mhm.
about it so much, put it off, which feels very counter to, well, at least in Orthodox Christian thought, there's a lot of emphasis on remembering death and preparing for death. And
Hmm.
even in how like we do like a funeral, like I mean, we parishes, many parishes will tend to like kind of be their own funeral team, take care of the bodies, and so like the body of the repose is brought like right into the church building, and he's just like liturgy happens around our dead and everything, and it was just like which I appreciate because it's a way of normalizing this is part of all of our lives, and we're all headed there, so memento mori. Let's all remember it and be ready.
Hmm.
Yeah, one of the things I think we've lost over time is like it used to be when someone would die, they'd be in your home for a couple of days. And like now, we grow up and we are hardly ever around death. Someone dies and we may
Hmm.
go to the funeral and we're there for a couple hours, but that's our only experience.
Right.
And I think it just doesn't seem as real sometimes when you don't come in contact with it the same way.
Yeah. Yeah. I think definitely I felt that with my own father's death. So I wasn't here until about probably 14 hours after he passed because I had to find flights and stuff. But he was in the room like shortly before I got there is when the coroner took him away, or the ambulance, because we couldn't find a coroner here. But then when they took his body to be prepared, that's when my mom and I had a visitation, and that was definitely like, already going through all of the emotions that I had
Mhm.
with my dad, and many unresolved things that I had with my dad, but also like sitting in with death, and having to reckon with that so very in my face.
Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds really powerful.
Mm.
So, um, oh, my counselor hat's like I kind of want to put on my counselor hat a little bit, but another time.
We don't have time
Uh,
for
right. Yeah. Well, I mean, mostly just because it's like, I mean, that sounds like a really profound, deep experience, and like lately, I mean, the kind of one that I'd want to share with somebody or
Yeah.
sharing. I mean, there's a lot of emotions that come up and something like that, and it seems like a really great opportunity to really be with people, or
Mhm.
um, there would be a way. I know there'd be a way that I know you more after we grieve together.
Yes.
So yeah. Um, well, okay, so remember your death. There is no smooth segue from that. So let's talk about pleasure. So I'll take letter 22. So in letter 22, my dear Wormwood, so your man is in love, and in the worst kind he could possibly fallen into, with a girl who does not even appear in the report you sent me. So apparently I was having at first a hard time getting a gauge on like what kind of woman this was. You kind of get the sense she's a young woman, pretty virtuous, and a virgin, and a Christian girl, and here's where there's this interpretive thing. So Screwtape hates her and everything,
Mhm.
and he's like calling her this simpleton and
Mhm.
everything. I wonder if from the other side though, from the Christian perspective, she would actually be seen as just somebody who's like really stable and like uncomplicated, or
I get
what.
I get the sense that she's very plain.
Yeah.
Yeah, kind of plain. Which I guess I could go a couple ways because there could be the kind of plane that's like I'm just like a little bit spacey because I maybe haven't really encountered much life or really deeply thought about things,
Mhm.
and based on some other things that get said about her, that might be the case. but I also kind of wonder though if there's a way where if it could be seen as also somebody who still has a lot of innocence or enough background that they really just like haven't had a lot of drama, or they've made maybe like mostly wise choices, like actually somebody kind of healthy. And I know working with people in recovery, there's kind of a way where stepping into like a healthy, stable, non-chaotic lifestyle can feel really boring and even really depressing because I'm no longer having the highs of the drugs and the sex and everything, but I'm also like not having the highs of the chaos and the drama, and that can feel really wrong or can feel really empty if that's new to me. So kind of wonder if that's part of what's going on. So we can flesh that out more because she gets mentioned in some other letters, and so there's she's not a perfect person, but anyway, so our patient is meeting this woman, and they're a little interested. One of the things I'll emphasize in this one is related to pleasure. There's this quote, talking about Screwtape's enemy. So God has filled his world full of pleasures. There are things for humans to do all day long without his minding in the least: sleeping, washing, eating, drinking, making love, praying, playing, working. Everything has to be twisted before it's any use to us, is what Screwtape says to Wormwood. And I think what the thought I was latching onto there was the way that God has designed pleasure, or there's a kind of the combination of pleasure and desire. People are created with desires, and desires are, well, we could actually say humans are created with capacity for infinite desire that thus can only be satisfied by the infinite, by God Himself. But there's a way we could see all of our desires for pleasures as all fingers pointing to the moon, and they all should be ways that all of our desires for pleasure should all be ways to point to awaken desire, which should eventually point our focus, point our hearts back to God, who can be the ultimate fulfillment of that. And then where things go wrong is we don't turn back to God, or we over desire things, or we desire wrong things, or again, it's this twisting of things. And Screwtape seems to have a sense of this. He's wanting Wormwood to really get in the patient's head and just like over desire this woman, and really dig into the lust and everything. So there's a way. I think that there could be a way where in the healthy Christian life we could actually reacquaint ourselves with pleasure a little bit, or at least not be afraid of it. There would have to be the context of me even taking something like we talk about lust, and I know in Christian circles we make a really big deal about sexual sin, but even recognizing, okay, so I'm filled with sexual desire. That's a lot, and it's a big force. Has to be handled very carefully. But could I also recognize, well, behind these physical feelings, there's a longing for love, for attachment, for security, for comfort, all of which are good things, and even attainable. There is a proper context for them, and so I guess maybe the healthier, more balanced approach to these pleasures, especially the bodily pleasures, is to try to look for, well, what is the deeper spiritual need reflected by the pleasures. So that's my thought there. Be curious, what do you two think from this one?
Yeah, very much kind of the same thing, like this sort of like all things are allowed, sort of like all things were created for good, and that it's not the act, typically at least, that's the bad thing. It's the the perversion of it, where motive comes in and takes over and drives us to different places.
Yeah. I think it also, just the whole letter is kind of emphasizing that who we choose to spend time with, they have a big impression on us. With the patient being, getting together with this girl. Yeah, she may be plain, she may be steady, but she's having a really good, um, ex- you know, she's having a good impact on him that is devastating for the, Wormwood.
Yeah.
And, I think it just who you spend time with, you're going to end up like.
Yeah, makes me think again about there's this fallacy of like the Lone Ranger Christian or this idea. Well, it's just me and Jesus over here in my living room or something. And I don't see that anywhere really in the scriptures or in the teaching of the church. Like there's not really a place for the solitary Christian. So slight exception for like the ascetic hermits. But even then, like they would still be accountable to somebody. So they're not like isolated and they're not cut off from the church, and they're still participating in the same tradition. And also that's a very rare case. But like everywhere else, like they're we're meant to be in community with each other, and that's one of our huge safeguards.
You need other people to encourage you in anything you're doing in life, whether that be, school or work, or, you need people, and spiritually is no different. You need the support of other people, to help you do anything.
Yum. Very much so. Yes, indeed. Steph, what are your thoughts on letter 23 here?
Before we get to 23,
yes,
can I just say the end of 22?
It's so good.
Made me laugh so hard.
Oh yeah.
Screwtape gets so mad that he turns into a centipede and can't finish writing the letter and needs his assistant. And I just thought it was so funny.
Yeah.
And I had to mention it.
It's completely worth mentioning because it was really hilarious, and so Toadpipe gets honorable mention here. So,
yes.
Which is it's just like a funny quirk of the other writing, because it very much has. Like me and Jake were talking about like feeling completely called out by like the poignancy of like the spiritual instruction. Stephanie's a saint, so she's probably good. But there's like a little bit of a fiction component to it too. So there's there's this like backstory of like how Screwtape is like really critical of Wormwood, and I guess Wormwood's like kind of botching this thing up, and then they randomly turn into centipedes. So
it's just so funny. He gets so mad.
Hilarious.
I love, for some reason, the sign off, like signed Toadpipe for his abysmal sublimity under Secretary Screwtape, TEBS, etc.
Yes. That's awesome.
Great. It's great.
That's just really funny. So cool. All right. Stephanie, letter 23. What are your thoughts?
Okay. So letter 23, the girlfriend's still in play. She's having a lot of influence on the patient, which is devastating for Screwtape and Wormwood. And they're like, well, we can't remove spirituality from this guy's life. That's not the goal anymore. We need to corrupt it. So he starts talking about the historical Jesus, historical point of view, and how like you can make someone focus on figuring out what isn't said in the Bible instead of what is, which I just thought was really, it's so we teach youth group and stuff, and we have discussions with our students, and we recently had one that's talking about free will versus predestination and all of that, and just trying to figure out what it doesn't say everything. The Bible doesn't say everything, and I think we do. Students do it, but also these guys theologians who've been studying for years and years and years are still, we're always trying to figure out what isn't in the Bible. And I just thought it was really interesting that this is a tactic that Screwtape is using to corrupt this guy's spirituality, or Wormwood is supposed to be using. Because it's very sneaky to focus on that one little, what isn't in there.
Yeah, that kind of reminds me of my whole experience of like Christian college and going to theology classes, because it's it's that really obsessively analytical approach to like, well, here's the text, and how do we understand the text? And I remember, yeah, I mean, I had no concept of like, Jesus versus historic Jesus or anything. When growing up in church, I was just like, here's Jesus in the Gospels. Wow, look at how he's like caring for people and like including the outcast. That's awesome. I love him. And then it felt like, yeah, I get to college and suddenly have to think about it and like overthink it, and it got really burdensome. And I think that was where like I was almost like, that almost like turned me off to the whole thing, because it was just like, I mean, what is real anymore? I don't know what's real. And then yeah, like I took a text and canon class, and we were learning, going over like, well, what actually does or doesn't belong in the Bible, and like assigning us like sophomores in college to determine like, well, should the ending of the Gospel of Mark be there or not? And like you choose. And I was just like, what is this? Like, so it was really quite a blow, because I mean, I'd grown up, reading and loving and trusting in the Bible, and then all of a sudden that whole foundation was just like ripped away from me through like, over analysis. And yeah, I was troubled. So anyway.
Yeah. Jared has described very similar things of that first year.
Yeah, it was pretty intense. So
it's funny because I think this is the chapter that I very much disagree with the most.
Oh, okay, yeah.
At least in my interpretation of like how Lewis is coming across, and I could be like misreading things, but like the idea, like, yes, Scripture says what it says, but also like there is, if we don't allow for ourselves for deeper understanding and context and history of what's going on, it is so wildly easy to interpret what Paul said for the whole of the church, where some of his letters were very specific to those churches and what was going on in those churches at that time. And so I think I'm probably overreading into kind of what he was talking about, because again, of some of like my traditional background, where Scripture, because we're just reading it literally, we're just reading it plainly, right, was very weaponized. And so like for me, finding that, I don't know if what I'm talking about is what he's talking about with like the historical Jesus and kind of all the baggage that he's talking about that's coming with that. But like that was actually really freeing to me. Also having like, I'm a layperson when it comes to the church. And so like having that to just fall back into and research into and see like what was going on. And then of course also having to grapple with the like, what's real? Because like, that basic naive almost understanding, as many of us enter into the church at a young age, of like, well, Scripture just, it is. But at the same time, like these were words written by human hands. And so you have to grapple with like, okay, humanity is imperfect. So does that, I don't know. And then like grappling through that growing process, which is like very much where I read like the historical Jesus. So I think this was the letter that I really like, I didn't like at all.
Yeah. I hear you. And actually, I mean, and I'm glad you bring that in, because it's good for us to see things differently. So, but I think where I would align with you, Jake, is remembering, yes, like the Bible is not a history book. It's not a science book. It's revelation from God, and it's going to read differently than like any other genre. So one should not read the Bible to learn historical data, or one should not read the Bible for a linear moment by moment, play by play of this is what happened. We don't read Genesis to see this is how the world was built. We read Genesis more to learn, well, who is the God who built the world, that sort of thing. And it is important, like the gospel events. I mean, we could say those are the most important events ever, but they're also, 2000 years ago on the other side of the world, and this completely different culture. And so if we neglect all of the lenses between us and then yeah, we're going to come up with some screwy interpretations. We do need to revisit the history and step back into like the mindset of the people. So
you need the context.
Yeah, we need the context. what I wonder is when Lewis is pointing this out, I wonder if he's talking more about focusing more on like, well, here is Jesus the man, here is Jesus the historical figure, like here's the history events, and to the extent that the spiritual significance, Jesus as God gets missed. Maybe that's what he's thinking about.
Yeah, and I could definitely see elements of that too. And it was weird to me because, and maybe again, like the world is very different from, gosh, nearly 100 years ago since this book was written.
Yeah.
And so like it's interesting to me that he closed up this chapter with this idea that, we want to push people. I'm fairly certain it's this chapter. My notes have been a little off today. That they want people to treat Christianity as a means to an end instead of an end. And like it's very interesting that like he talked about trying to loop in Christianity with like pushing ideas of historical Jesus to Marxian and catastrophic and revolutionary lines, where like today I would kind of see this kind of inverted by all of the politics that we have going on today. And it's definitely like both sides, if we're going to call it like a two-party system, definitely use this, but like how deeply weaponized Jesus and scripture and etc. have been, to kind of what I would say is the opposite end of the political spectrum to what Lewis has been talking about here. And so that's also of like I don't know. The topic seemed incongruous to me. But again, like the world is very different, very, very different. Talk about historical context.
Yeah. Lewis is like almost 100 years ago across the ocean. So different time, different culture, different wars, different political scene. But he does seem to revisit this theme a couple of times where one of the tactics of the devils is to accessorize Christianity, or to say like Wormwood, have your man use the faith to support whatever else he's doing, to support social reforms, to support pacifism or pro-war or whatever, and I could see that coming up today too, where I mean there's super conservative people, there's super liberal people, there's I mean I'll let the listener insert your political issue of choice, but you're going to get people, you're going to get Christian people on both sides who will both use their faith as justification for their viewpoint. And in that sense, it does feel like something's been added to the gospel, or something is competing with the gospel for primacy. and that might be the thing to be really careful of. So now that we've narrowly avoided being very political, so okay, let's see. Jake, you want to do letter 24?
Yeah. So in this letter, Screwtape is back in correspondence with Slum Trimpet, something like that, who's the person who's in charge of our patient's young woman. And he thinks that he's finally found like the chink in this woman's armor. And what he says is that it consists of quite untroubled assumption that the outsiders that do not share her belief or belief set are really too stupid and ridiculous. And so he kind of launches into this idea around, like, I would say, I don't think he calls it out as like spiritual pride or something, but this kind of like us versus them, who's in, who's out mentality, and get him to focus on that. And then also like shifting the ideas of like Christians versus non-Christians to be very different from what they actually are, and that like kind of his, it's his circle versus not his circle, it's the exciting versus the boring, it's whatever, and then this kind of grows into this self-congratulatory thing, but again it's like congratulation of what? And you don't ever want him to try and find the answer to that question. You don't want him to answer that question. It's the that puffing up sort of a thing. And it's like throughout this letter too, like he definitely still replays back on some of the themes from what was that, chapter 21 or 22, kind of all of the many of them around, like, you know, there are pleasures that are created um that they're trying to corrupt, and like this interesting thing of like, oh, the enemy is drawing our, you know, our patient to this good woman through the means of sexual love. So there's definitely that, and the letter does close on, like, again, this is happening during or like theoretically around the first world war. Is it second? I think it's
Second, I
first.
think.
Is it
Yeah,
for second?
1941-ish.
Okay. I couldn't
I
remember like
think.
where Lewis was like trying to place these letters
Mhm.
himself. But he says, don't fill your letters with rubbish about the European war. Its final issue, no doubt important, is a matter for high command. Like, I don't care about this, and I can learn all of that from the office. Like, and I think we get a little bit more into that later on as well.
Mm.
And so it's, you know, it's again, like some of that being called out of like, you know, oh, look at me, I'm so good, but like, what am I so proud about, sort of a thing. I definitely had a lot of that growing up,
Mhm.
like a ton of that growing up. Was just chatting with somebody from my high school a couple of days ago. We happened to see each other in Seattle. We actually didn't know that's who it was, and we started chatting. And I just had this immediate pang of like, oh my God, I was such a jerk in
Mhm.
high school because I thought I was better than everybody else because I went to church.
Mhm.
Same.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I
Same.
hope I'm better. I'm still like so worried that I'm not, right. And it changes too. It's so easy to apply that
Mhm.
into other things of life. Like from like the LGBTQIA plus sphere, we'll often kind of see that with like allyship or whatever, performative allyship, but it happens so many different places because we love to feel good about ourselves. We love to
Mhm.
Mhm.
like that feeling of betterness, and especially better than and being on the in, which Screwtape also talks about this, of like having a secret basically, and that being
Mhm.
very exciting and distracting, more importantly, is, you know, it's intoxicating.
Yeah.
Intoxicating is a good word for it. And I remember, I mean, I was completely a self-righteous prick when I was a kid. You know, and it was maybe it was a common, and I think it was a combination of like the particular church I was in. Like there was a stronger tribalism feel to it, and I was homeschooled, and so like
Mhm.
that just like made it worse. So because homeschoolers were better than all you public school people,
We were smarter.
right? Yeah. Goodness, Lord
Mhm.
have mercy. Yeah, I wonder. So, what would you say, Jake? Because it seemed it's um there was something he said. Screwtape was saying about this young lady, something about like the unexamined aspect of her life or whatever. I guess. What do you think is the role of good self-examination, self-reflection, and breaking oneself out of these cycles?
Oh, it's near everything, I would say. It's certainly what happened to me to start to break out of some of these things. And it happened as a catalyst. Like the catalyst was something external, right? It was something that
Mhm.
pushed me to like really re-examine myself. And it wasn't necessarily somebody calling me out on some things, though that did happen, and necessarily so. But a lot of the time it was, you know, having the space and being willing to be quiet enough to listen to the other's story. I still have a very vivid kind of recollection of this person who I was talking with when I was in college. It was the first time I had ever been really properly exposed to anyone, LGBTQ or otherwise. And this person is trans. And talking through her experiences within the church and how like awfully she was treated, um, even though she was very faithful, very, very faithful, and stuff like that. And so, and that was one of the first breakdowns of like, oh, wow, people aren't all like me. And my view of the other, which again is it's a horrible thing a lot of the times,
Mhm.
is very misshapen.
Yeah. Yeah, that sounds like a really powerful experience and a really necessary one to like really encounter someone. And when that language is easy to throw around, but but the mechanics of it are not terribly complicated. It's just like let me hear your uncensored story, without overly
Mhm.
trying to interpret it, and maybe being
Mhm.
curious if there's a little bit more of it that you want me to know.
Yeah.
That is a really good, necessary experience for us. So I'm glad that you had that.
Yeah, I think there's something to be said too about, paying attention to what people say about the people around you. Like, one of the things that brought all this to my attention was that I was at school, the high school, and I overheard some other kids talking about some kids in my youth group and saying they say that they believe this, but then they act like this. And, I knew these kids. I like thought really highly of them because they're good and stuff. They do all the right things. And it was just like, oh, maybe, maybe what we're doing is not what we think we're doing.
Mhm.
And that was like the first like step back, And since then there's so many other things, that I found that I'm like, "Oh, my thinking was so bad. I thought so highly of myself." One of the things, my parents were part of a parenting ministry and would teach classes. They didn't like lead the whole thing, but we were friends with some of the people who did. And while they would teach these classes, me and a friend would go and babysit the kids of these parents who are in these classes. And I remember judging these parents so badly because I'm like, "I know all the things, and I know exactly what you should be doing, and you're not doing it." And now I have kids, and and I disagree with so many of the things that I thought was like, "This is what you do," you know? And it's just like, oh,
Mhm.
I feel so bad for those parents.
Mm. Yeah.
Having some 16-year-olds who thought they knew everything watching their kids.
Oh goodness. I'm right there with you. I think I went into parenting thinking like, oh, I'm a counselor. My wife's a Montessori teacher. We're gonna be so good at this. And I
Mhm,
mean, and maybe, well, by the glory of God, hopefully we are a little bit better than our parents. But I'm so bad at this. Or my view of myself as this pristine father has completely crumbled.
mhm.
And I feel really sad about that. And okay, well, we'll not make this my therapy session. But if somebody wants to like hear my woes and like all the things that I've learned about parenting and not parenting, but yes, we should talk about that sometime. But yeah, but I guess, I mean, what I think I hear you talking about, Stephanie, is like,
Yeah.
we can have this really great view of ourselves until we
Mhm,
actually get out and encounter people and encounter life and
mhm.
actually, like, it's easy to judge somebody we don't understand.
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
once we've actually gone through a similar sort of struggle, uh, I find it quite a bit easier to have a little bit of compassion on the person. So,
Mhm.
Yeah.
yeah. Um, okay. Letter 25. My dear Wormwood, the real trouble about the set your patient is living in is that it is merely Christian. Um, so fun that I had a fun moment there, obviously, because C.S. Lewis also wrote Mere Christianity, and so I'm wondering how these two informed each other. But so this seems to be continuing the theme of what is the role of Christianity and the faith in one's life. And um, uh, Screwtape, he wants his thought is that if men become Christians at all, or people become Christians at all, the goal is to keep them in the state of mind I call Christianity and so he talks about Christianity in the crisis, Christianity in the new psychology, Christianity in the new order, Christianity in faith healing, Christianity in physical research, Christianity in vegetarianism and spelling reform, and all of these things. Um, and I mean, I was definitely feeling a little bit called out here because I mean, I think I've had moments where it's like, oh yeah, Christianity and social justice, or Christianity and yoga, or more particularly for me, it's like Christianity and counseling.
Mhm.
So
Mm.
that this is where I was feeling called out because well, and also Christianity and counseling, also Christianity and like fiction writing, because I
Mhm.
totally found myself basically like appropriating stuff. Be like, oh, there's a cool element, or there's a cool technique, or oh sure, like ascetic labors, yeah, I'll work that into mindfulness, or this aspect of monasticism, I'll just like extract that and like put it into a story that I'm writing because it's cool.
Mhm.
And I think I'm in error there, and I think that's not how Christianity is meant to be approached, because it's not an accessory. And Screwtape knows this. Wormwood's learning this, and I think he's well, that I'm reading this as Screwtape would like this patient to have Christianity be just this add-on to something else, whatever that something else is, because whatever that something else is not God, and it's not ultimate, and it's not ultimately enough to save him or heal him, but it can be enough to like just distract him from really centering things. So, which feels like, and here I'm again, feeling called out here, like how I'm coming to understand Christianity is it's meant to be a central thing. It's meant to be an all-encompassing thing, and it can't really be done part-time. But I would very much like to do it part-time because I'd really like to run my life the way that I want to run it and do all the things that I want to do and be in control of something. And so, but that doesn't seem to work. So he talks about that in the first part of the letter, and in the second part of the letter is where he's talking more about exaggerating pleasures, and he's talking about the rhythms and seasons of spirituality and how there can be this urge to like always have something new and always have something extreme, and but then there's a balance between like this rigid, unchanging, unyielding tradition. We do the same things we've always done because we've always done them, like rigidity. And then there's this other extreme of like constant novelty, constant reinventing yourself. And there seems to be this sense for where there can be like a healthy rhythm, and he uses the example of seasons. Seasons, there's change there, so things get refreshed, but it's within parameters. It's always the same seasons, minus global warming. But there's this balance of you have some change, have some new things, but not too much. Have some pleasure, but not too much. And it seems like the demons really like the extremes, or when we get into these extremes of rigidity and chaos, super going through the motions, or super stupid novelty, and so he's wanting the patient to be in these extreme modes, and again, I'm feeling a little called out because I lean toward extremes, like in general, and finding and maintaining a seasonal balance has often been hard. Although I will say that has been something that I've appreciated very much coming into the Orthodox Church and Orthodox spiritual practice, is the liturgical calendar. We're coming up in very shortly on the Lenten season again, and we just had the Nativity fast, and we'll come up on the Lenten fast leading into Pascha, and so I'm feeling that rhythm of kind of like dysregulated, unregulated spiritual life, which will come into very structured, very, very rigorous spiritual life, which will come into like this brilliant like feasting period, and then like the long summer, and then back into the winter again. And now that I've done this a few times, there's something very comforting about knowing what's coming, knowing the changes that are coming, knowing the rigors that are coming, and also knowing the feasting that will happen after. I've found that rhythm just really, really comforting and really stabilizing too. But that being said, I've ranted a bit. What are some of your thoughts about accessorized Christianity and a novelty?
Well, like going into that like routine and like stagnant thing, one of the things that Jared looks at as a youth leader is like you're looking at your program constantly. And one of the hardest things when you go into a new church is that there's usually all these traditions of, well, we always do this because and that's not always a bad thing to have those traditions, but why are we doing it? That's the biggest question is, that he asks. And if there's not a good reason, if it's just, well, because we do, well, maybe we need to try something else. Um, but yeah, I think it takes about 3 years in any, like when you're revamping a ministry, to work through and, you know, produce those change and keep the things that are good and are solid, because you're right, there does need to be some stability and routine, but you also need to be able to evaluate, why are we doing this? Is this actually working with the people that we have? Is it really serving any purpose? Or are we just doing it because we always do it?
Mhm.
Yeah. Would you say then the well, then it sounds like being able to self-reflect again.
Mhm.
Sounds like it's kind of an important thing. Um, yeah, indeed. Yeah. Jake, any thoughts here?
Yeah, I think like again, picking up on that idea of self-examination, we also have this reflected idea of like, the other and the better than, like, all of these Christian groups, the, Christianity and the new psychology, Christianity and the new order, Christianity and the faith healing, Christianity and the psychical research, and the vegetarianism and the spelling reform. I thought that one was pretty funny.
Yeah.
But like, Screwtape makes the point of like, if they have to be Christians, let them be Christians with a different and substituting, like you were kind of saying at the beginning of the chapter, like substituting faith itself for some sort of fashion, with like a coloring of Christianity. And again, like that swapping out of like, what's the main point?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Because I think all of these things can be useful as like not layers on top of, but like viewed through a Christian lens. So I wouldn't want to say layers underneath, because that also implies a foundational sort of a thing. But yeah, it's very, I don't know, focusing on the differences rather than what unites people. We pray for unity in the body, and how often do we not see that? It seems to be pretty
Mhm.
constant.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. I would wonder. So pulling back from the specific letters a little bit, because we have a little time left. I'd be curious your thoughts, observations on kind of the meta arc of this. Um, so in a sense, we're watching this human fella in 1940s England go through the spiritual life, or go through his spiritual development, and there kind of seems to be an arc there, or there seems to be some themes. And be curious, looking at that big arc over the course of many letters. What are some themes that stand out to you both about what spiritual life is, what spiritual growth is, some major themes and hazards, or anything?
I don't know. I think just the main overarching thing for me is that the spiritual life is not a straight line. It's
Mm,
a lot of ups and downs and, big wins and big losses, but that there's always a chance, there's always that ability to get to maintain and to get back to where you were, even if you do make those dips, even if you do fall prey to those temptations that, these Screwtape and Wormwood are like trying to do, is you still can end up with the enemy in the end. You know,
Yeah.
there's always opportunity.
Yeah. Does that offer, I guess, more concern or more like security stability, do you think?
I think honestly, security and stability,
mhm.
because we aren't perfect and we do still mess up. It doesn't matter, I mean, it does matter that you believe in God, but you're still going to mess up. It's not I made this choice and I'm perfect forever. It's I made this choice and I know I'm still going to mess up. But having the stability and security of knowing I'm messing up, but I can still make that right. I can still repent. I can still, I can still end up with the enemy, with
Mm.
God.
Yeah,
I
yeah, yeah. For
is
as much as
encouraging.
Yeah, for as much as I could fall right up until the end, I could also repent right up until the end too.
Mhm.
So yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. No, thank you for that. Yeah, Jake, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, Steph really kind of summed up a lot of it. I think for me, like I think we've in both of the recordings that we've been a part of, like the idea, and I bring this up in just about everything that we talk about, I think, but this idea of
Mm,
like other and letting that become a distraction um, is really like it kind of keeps getting drawn back up in the midst of all of this, the spiritual life cycle, I guess. Kind of, I don't know, for me it's this imagination. I hope anyway. This is going to be so nerdy, so bear with me. But do you know what a sine wave is?
Yes.
I know I learned about it once.
Okay,
Yes.
so it's imagine you have like a graph, a plot, and basically it kind of cycles from 1 to -1, 1 to -1. But you can also adjust the equation to like if you add an additional like just um, linear step, that wave kind of keeps going up and down, but there's still a trajectory for that thing. And like
Mhm.
that's a hopeful view of like I guess my
Mhm.
like spiritual life and stuff. Like there's still going to be troughs and there's still going to be peaks, but hopefully like the trajectory is where I want to be going. And so um yeah, that was very kind of bouncing around a little bit, but
Mm, bouncing
yeah.
up and down.
It makes me think of like when you see a graph of your kids like grades and
Mhm.
they'll chart like all the different tests and like it might go up and down, but hopefully you're following the line up.
Right.
Yeah, yeah. There's one of the letters with the intersection that we didn't really get to talk about today a lot. Screwtape's talking about that. Like he wants Wormwood's patient to survive the war, I think, so that he has time to fall into routine and get bored and like
Mhm.
be like just gently corrupted by the mundane prosperity of like making oneself at home in life and like letting the soul fall away by attrition.
Mhm.
And I appreciate that idea of the sine wave and the nonlinear, you still on a progression. It brings to mind this idea that a major key to the spiritual life is just like staying with it and recognizing my highs are not my reality, my lows are not my reality.
Mhm.
They're just parts of it, and the key is to be steadfast, be faithful, remain on the path, and um, having that end in sight. And so it seems like if one were to kind of study and develop spiritual disciplines, maybe the goal shouldn't be how can I get these breathtaking insights, but how can I get up tomorrow and do the same thing that I did today,
Mhm.
and just keep doing that and keep doing that and trust that, sure, yes, insight will happen in that, but the key is like I need to just keep doing it.
Mhm.
Yep.
So
A daily choice type of thing.
yes, very many daily choices.
Mhm.
Or as the good Lord says, he taught us to pray, give us this day our daily bread.
Mhm.
Mhm.
That doesn't allow for a lot of like big fancy future planning, but it
Mhm.
does allow for, well, I can do one day at a time, and and that's all I can do. So Lord have mercy on us all.
Mm.
Mhm.
So, all right. Well, I think that is coming close to our time for today, and we've gotten through most of the Screwtape letters. There are a small handful left to read yet, and in my version anyway, there's this epilogue at a story, something like Screwtape proposes a toast. So
Mhm.
Mhm.
there maybe a bonus episode coming up. I will confer with these other wonderful people. But in any case, once again, really great to see you guys. Any last quick closing thoughts on anything here?
Honestly,
Okay.
not really. We've
Okay.
said so many things.
We
I know.
did. Yeah.
Okay. All right. We've said many things, so we are good. So then, yes, contact info for everyone will be in the liner notes. Please do rate and review and share the podcast, and tune in again more next time for more fun thoughts. We will have more fun things to say, and sneak peek for people coming up soon. We will be covering the strange case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
Ooh.
So hopefully that will be fun, and then more to come after that. But peace will be with everyone, and have a wonderful day. Word and Journey is a podcast by Moses Bernabe. If you like what you hear, consider supporting the show with dollars, reviews, or shares, or all of the above. Word and Journey can be found on most major podcast platforms and on my author Patreon at patreon.com/Moses Bernabe. Moses Bernabe can be found at mosesbernabe.com. Contact info for my most excellent co-hosts can be found in the liner notes. The podcast logo was designed by TJ Todd, with additional development by Moses Bernabe. The theme music is by Aaron Esparza. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.